We're in the bottom of Daf Ayin Aleph on Beit Beis, where it says, My Rab Meir. The first word on the line is Eiruvin. So over here, the last point we were talking about is, B'nigei to a person that made a shituf muva'os, but he did not make an Erev Chatzeres. So does the shituf muva'os, because all the Chatzeres made a shutfus in this mavoi, is that shutfus good enough also for the Chatzeres? That they all put food in one place and therefore they can also carry from one chatzah to another, or even in their Chatzeres, or not? That's the machlokes that the Gemara brought up before, and here the Gemara brings the source of this inyan. My Rab Meir. What's the source of Rab Meir's shittah that says that if you made a shittuf in a mavoi, you can't rely for that in that for the Erev Chatzeres? My Rabbanan, and what do the Rabbanan hold that disagree with this? Tanya, we learned in a Braise, Ma'arvin b'chatzeres b'pas. When it comes to Erev Chatzeres has to be dafke with bread. The reason is because the whole concept of Erev Chatzeres is that everybody is living in one house. And if you're living in one house, the main achila of a person is pas. So therefore it has to be dafke bread. V'imratzu la'arev b'yayin. If you want to make an Erev with wine, Ein ma'arvin. That's not food that you kaveya, and it's not this. You can't make an erev with wine. If you remember, we had before b'negei to erev tchumen. Erev tchumen, you could use all kinds of things for erev tchumen, even sometimes a mashu, or even a little bit of. We had before a whole list in the Gemara of different kinds of foods for that. But when it comes to erev chatzeres, it has to be pas. Mishtatfen b'mavoi b'yayin. But the shituf that you make for a mavoi, that could be even with wine. The shituf that you make in a mavoi is these chatzeres are sharing. You have a few chatzeres that open up to the same mavoi, and they want to be able to carry in the mavoi. So over here, the idea is not to be mishatif by putting food into a house. The chatzeres are being mishatif. So it's not food that's being placed in the house, therefore it doesn't have to be pas. It could be even wine. They could also make a shituf with bread. That's the difference between the shituf muvais and Erev Chatzeres. Now the Braise continues, Ma'arvim b'chatzeres or mishtatvim b'mavi. Rab Meir says you have to make separately an Erev Chatzeres and the shituf in the mavi. You can't rely just on the shituf of the mavi. Shaloi l'shkoyach teires Erev minatinaikis. So that the children, the next generation, should not forget about the idea of an Erev Chatzeres. If you're not going to make one, they're going to forget it. Sheyoim Rav Yiseinu lo yirvu. They're going to say that our parents never made an Erev Chatzeres if they're only going to rely on the shituf and the mavi. In other words, what the Gemara is saying is that really there should be no problem to rely on the shituf of the mavi. Once you have the shituf of the mavi, so all the people of the Chatzeres are in the shtatuf in one place, so therefore that's enough even for the Chatzeres. But not to forget the concept of Erev Chatzeres, Rav Meir says you have to make a separate Erev Chatzeres and a separate shituf muvais. The Chachamim say, Oy ma'arvin, Oy mishtatven. You can do either or. Either you make an Erev or you make a shituf. You don't have to have both. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain when, in what case, Rav Meir and the Chachamim argue. Pligi ba Rav Nechumi ve'Rabba, or the Bachas Geiris, Pligi ba Rav Nechumi ve'Rabba bar Yosef. Chadamar bipas, if you're making a shituf in the mavi with bread, which would work even if you make it in Erev Chatzeres, to kula malei pligi de b'chadasagi. So then, nobody argues that having just one would be good enough. Because it's pas could work, is good enough to make the shituf and also for the Erev Chatzeres. Ki pligi b'yayin. The machlokes is if they made a shituf in the mavoi with sharing wine together. Wine is not good for the Erev Chatzeres. So what's the machlokes? Rashi explains the machlokes is, do you say since for the shituf mavoi the wine does work, so therefore now that it worked for the mavoi, it also works for the Chatzeres? Or no? Or do I say that for the mavoi shituf of the wine is good enough, but to make it for the Erev Chatzeres it doesn't work? It's two separate things. That's the machlokes. Dafke by the wine. Chadamar. Another opinion is biyayin the kulam lepliga de bin and tarti. If they made an Erev, a shituf with wine, so everybody would agree that that doesn't work for the Erev Chatzeres. You have to have pas. It's two separate things. Ki pligi bepas. When's the machlokes beneged to bread? You made an Erev or Shittuf Mavos with bread, and now you want to rely on that also for your Erev Chatzeris. Here's the machlokes if you can rely on it or not. Rav Meir still says that you have to make two separate things, so you shouldn't forget Teiras Erev Chatzeris. You have to have an Erev for the Chatzer and a Shittuf for the Mavi. So this was the opinion of Rav Meir, where you see that Rav Meir holds that you have to have a separate Eruv and a separate Shittuf, and Rav Meir holds not only that, even if you actually made it bepas, still you can't rely on that. So that was the double chumrah that the Gemara brought up in the Gemara yesterday, that there's trei chumri, there's a double chumrah here in what Rav Meir said.
What's the two chumras?
Against the Chachamim. It's actually a double chumrah, not against the Chachamim of this Braisa, but it's a double chumrah against the Chachamim of the Mishnah. The Chachamim hold, even if you make just a Shittuf Mavos with wine, I can rely on that for the Chatzar. Rav Meir holds, even if you make it with pas, I can't rely on that for the Chatzar. So it comes out a double chumrah. Sagt the Gemara Meisvei, I'll ask you, according to this pshat, from the Lashon of the Braisa itself that we just learned. What does it say here? V'chachamim ma'imrim, oy ma'arvin, oy mishtatfin. Chachamim say, you don't have to have both. You can either make an Eruv, or you can make a Shittuf. My love, don't you think the pshat is, oy ma'arvin b'chatzer b'pas? Why is he saying both over here? He's saying, you can make an Eruv in the chatzer with pas, Oy mishtatfin b'mavoi b'yayin, or you can make a shittuf with wine. That's the only difference between Eruv and shittuf. That Eruv has a requirement of pas, and shittuf has a requirement of, you could even do it with wine. That's Chacham is saying separately, you could do either or. So what do I see over here? That the opinion of the Chachamim is that you could rely even on wine. So how could we say before that by yayin, one opinion that we had before was that by yayin, loy pligi, everybody holds that you can't rely on wine. So the Gemara says, Lav Dafka, that's not how you read this Braisa. Omer Rav Gidl Omer Rav, Hachi Kamar, this is how you read the Braisa. Oy ma'arvin b'chotzer b'pas. Either you can make the Erev in the Chotzer with pas, and that will be good enough for the Shittuf of the Mavi if you are ma'arv the Chatzeris with pas. Umetorin kan v'kan, and you'll be mutter to carry from one Chotzer to another, and also to carry in the Mavi. Oy mishtatvin b'Mavi, pas, or even in the Mavi as well, it has to be dafke with pas, umutarim, kan, v'kan, and then you'll be able to carry in both of them. In other words, when it says mishtatfin, it's similar to the Ma'arvin. He's putting them together, that even though usually the mishtatfin does not have to be with pas, it can be with wine, but over here, if you want to use it also for the chatzar, it has to be with pas. That's how you read the Braisa according to this opinion. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, halacha k'Rab Meir. We paskin like Rab Meir that you don't rely on the shittuf mavos for the Erev Chatzeris. For Rav Huna Amar minik k'Rab Meir. Rav Huna says it's not a halacha, but it's only a minig. So Rashi says, we had this a few times before. Rashi says when the Gemara says minig and not halacha, what it means is you don't darshan and paskin like this berabim, but if an individual comes to ask you what to do, you can tell him the minig that we follow like Rab Meir. But Rav Yechanan says, no go am k'Rab Meir. That it's not even a minig, but no go am. B'payil, this is what people do. So Rashi says, the pshat nagu means that if someone was naig this way, so then we don't have to be meicha against him. So Taisvus asks the question, what do you mean? Why would you be meicha? Rab Meir is the one that's machmer. Rab Meir says that you can't rely on the shit of mavos. You also have to make an Erev Chatzeris. Why would you be meicha against a chumrah? The Gemara brought this expression a few times before, but usually it's regarding a kula. So Taisus points out there could be a few examples where it comes out of kula. And the Taisus no go am k'Rab Meir. First of all, Taisus says that it won't be a bracha levatala. That you made already a shit of mavos, and in addition you're making an Erev Chatzeris. We don't paskin like Rab Meir. You don't have to do it, but if you do it, you make a bracha. We're not meicha. That's the first pshat of Taisvus. Second pshat of Taisvus is, let's say it's a case where there was a bris milah and you had to bring the things that you need, the sakin, the knife, or whatever it is that you needed for the bris milah, and this person is being machmer because he didn't make an Erev Chatzeris. He made a shit of mavos, he didn't make an Erev Chatzeris, and he's being machmer like Rab Meir. So he said, so Taisvus says over here also, we're not going to scream at him, you don't have to be meicha against him. Taisa brings another two answers. The first answer, by the way, that Taisa says about bracha levatala, most Rishonim disagree with this. That we are chayshish for bracha levatala since we don't paskin like Rab Meir. And it's negayah today when you make an Erev Chatzeris, and you have to know, did someone else make an Erev Chatzeris or not? And even b'chlal, when you make an Erev Chatzeris and there's an Erev in the city, there's an Erev in the whole city, and someone that made an Eruv in the whole city made an Eruv Chatzeris for the whole city, now the Shaila is, an individual that's making an Eruv on his block with his neighbor, could he make a bracha? Even if he doesn't rely on the Eruv, he doesn't carry with this Eruv. But there is an Eruv here, and there is an Eruv Chatzeris that someone made for the whole city, and you're making now for you and your neighbor, could you make a bracha or not? It could be a bracha levatala. It might, huh?
By Eruv Tavshilin, you say for the whole city, right? When you say
that's a different story. By Erev Tavshilin, there's no chash of a bracha. But by Erev Chatzeris, no, because you can't rely on that. There's a chiyuv on every person individually to make an Erev Tavshilin. Erev Chatzeris, if you're within, just like we said over here, if you're within a mavoi, that all the Chatzeris are neshtatif in the mavoi, so the individual Chatzer doesn't need really a Erev Chatzeris. You can rely on that. We don't pass like Rav Meir. If you're making it anyways to be machmer, there's no chiyuv in you to do this individual. There's no mitzvah chiyuv, so you can't make a bracha. It's a big shaila. In certain cities, you can't make a bracha b'chlal, an Erev Chatzeris, if there's an Erev there. I'm not going to get into the shaila of Brooklyn, okay? So whatever, ask your local Rav. Zok the Mishnah. Chamisha chaburais sheshofsu betraklen echad. If you have 5 groups of people that are living in one big house, like a big ballroom, and you put up partitions in this huge room, and in each partition, in each area, there's another person that's living there. So what's the halacha? Are they considered to be like separate dwellings? And therefore, what's the halacha if it's separate dwellings? First of all, you can't carry from one to another. If you want to carry from one dwelling to another, you have to make an Erev Chatzeris between them, within the same traklin. And second of all, if they're making an Erev Chatzeris with other people in the Chatzer, so then each one of them individually has to be mishtatif in the Erev Chatzeris. You can't just have one person from this house give the food for everybody. No, each one is living separately. So what's the halacha? You have to have a separate Erev for every single chabura. And so again, that's both if you're mishtatif with the other people of the Chatzer and also between them. No, there's one Erev for all of them. They are considered to be living in one house all together. The Gemara will explain, there's a lot of opinions in the Gemara how to learn Pshat in this Mishnah, but Rashi here quotes Bepashtus that we're going to say that the Pshat here is that there's no proper partition, full separation between one group and another. If there's mamish a full wall and it's totally separate, so then even Beis Hillel would agree. We're talking about the lashon of Rashi is a mechitza shveila, a low mechitza. We'll see what mechitza shveila means in the Gemara. Sagt the Mishnah, umaydim. Beis Hillel would agree. If you have a house and there's different rooms, some of them are living in one room, in another room, or on a second floor, that then you're going to need an Eruv for every group, for each, whatever, it's different apartments, it's different areas that they're living in, and there's a totally separate room. So then everybody will agree that you need a separate Eruv. The Gemara actually says that there's no chiddush in this. The Gemara will explain what this means. But let me just add to that. Obviously, what this means is when you have people that are living separately. Not if you have a house that has different rooms and they're all living in the same house, they're living in the same kitchen, and it's just a family that has a lot of rooms in the same house. That's not what this Mishnah is talking about. It's talking about different people that live in different rooms, and each one rents their own place and lives separately. That's what the Mishnah is talking about. It's different chaburais, different people. But there is a shaila that the Pais can bring up. Taisus brings it up. When you get to a situation where you have, if you look in the middle of Taisus and Maidim, it's a long Taisus. So in the middle it says, Im yesh la'adam seifer oy melamed bebeisai. Sometimes you have a person that is working for you, and he's living in your house permanently. So on one hand, he's sort of not part of the family. He's working for you. He lives separately. You give him a room. At the same time, though, he's not mamish like a renter that rents his own house or his own room in this house. He's a seifer and a melamed that's working for you. So it's a big machlokes between the shainim about this, if it's considered to be. And then Taisus adds also, oike en oisen habachrim, habam lum mitayre v'shruim kolechad b'cheder b'aliyah b'fnei atzma. You have a dormitory, and each one has their own room. What's the halacha then? Big machlokes hapaiskim about this, whether it's considered to be one room or two separate rooms. Taisus brings this up. Taisus says it's considered to be two separate rooms. Sorry, Taisus says it's considered to be one room. Most poskim say it's considered to be a separate room. It's a big discussion. I'm not 100% sure what the halacha l'maisa about this is, but this is a very practical thing to know in a dormitory.
As far as the Teda is ma'achid, that
This is ruchnisige Sachen. I don't know if you could apply that to the Benegayat and Eiruvin. I'm sure Benegayat and Eiruvin, such a thing.
This Trakum in Kristel Shmila
Yeah.
is outdoors or inside the
No,
house itself?
Yeah, house. Proper
It's not
house.
No, it's not proper house. If it's proper house,
It's a mass, it's like it's a big ballroom. Let's say like a huge room.
Oh.
And in that room,
There's
so it's
small
partitions.
partitions.
There's partitions that divide one section to another. Sagt the Gemara Amar Rav Nachman, Machlaikis, the Machlaikis between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is b'misipis. When you have some kind of a partition made of wood material that is less than 10 tfachim. Avol b'mechitza asara, if it's a partition between one section and another section in this big room that's 10 tfachim high, divrei hakoil, eruv, l'chol, chabura v'chabura. Everybody, Beis Hillel would agree that you have to have a different eruv for every chabura. That's enough of a partition to separate them. That's the first opinion. Iked Amri, others said in the name of Rav Nachman, different. Amar Rav Nachman, af b'misipis machlaikis. The argument is even in a case of misipis. In other words, in a case where you have a mechitza that's 10 tfachim high, for sure there's a machlaikis between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, if they have to make a separate eruv or not. The chiddush is, even if it's only a misipis, which is a very shvache mechitza, I would think in such a case Beis Shammai is maida. Even in this case, Beis Shammai is machmer and says and argues that they have to make a separate eruv. This is, so we have two approaches here in the machlaikis. Now the Gemara brings again, weiter, that there's more ways how to explain this machlaikis. Pligi ba Rab Chiya v'Rab Shimon beRebbi. They also argued about how to taishis Mishnah. Chad amar machlaikis b'mechitzas hamagias letikra. They were arguing in a case when you have a partition that reaches all the way to the roof, a full partition from the floor to the roof. Okay, but Taisus clarifies, it doesn't mean a proper wall. Because if it's a proper wall, then that's exactly what it says in the Seif of the Mishnah, Chadarim. It's different rooms. So what it means is, if you look in Taisus, the bottom line of the Taisus, Kagon Yiriyos, Shemafsikan Ada Tikra. You have a material mechitza that's separating from the floor to the ceiling. So it's still not a proper mechitza, it's not a wall, but it's a full partition from ceiling to the wall. Huh?
In hospitals and sometimes.
Yeah, okay, exactly. Such a kind of thing, yeah. Mechitzes, she'emeint, I mean, in today's day and age, just, they have these movable partitions in the same room, like even in a chasana hall sometimes, right? They have, if you want to make the room smaller. So over there, they're not mamish magias letikra. Over here, we're talking about something which is magia letikra. But Taisa says yiriyas. I mean, the question is what exactly falls under the category of a yiriya and what's considered to be a proper wall, right? So it's not clear here in the Lashon of Taisus. I mean, bepashtus, if it's material, it's not a proper wall. If it's a proper wall, it's built as a wall. It's another cheder. But today you have these temporary mechitzas that you could move them away, but when you put them up, they're pretty permanent. They're pretty strong. They're almost soundproof even. Okay, so there's a shaila about that. Aval mechitzas she'ein magias latikra. According to this pshat in the Mishnah, if you have any mechitza, even if it's more than 10 tvachim high, but it doesn't reach all the way to the ceiling, everybody would agree that one erev is for, they're all one erev. Another opinion was, machlaikis b'mechitzis she'ein magias latikra. The machlaikis is by the mechitzis that do not reach all the way to the wall. Adarabah, that's where the machlaikis is, because it doesn't reach all the way to the ceiling. That is, because it doesn't reach all the way to the ceiling. So they argue whether the groups living here are separate. But if you have a full partition that reaches all the way to the ceiling, everybody would agree that you have to have a separate eruv for the groups that are living in the different areas. Okay, so we had 4 different ways how to explain the pshat in the Mishnah. Now the Gemara is going to bring a beferish brayse that talks about this. Meisvei Omer Rabbi Yehuda Sabar. Rabbi Yehuda Sabar said, what's this name, Rabbi Yehuda Sabar? So there's an interesting machlaikis here between Rashi and Taisus about what this is. Rashi says Hasabar means because he was very sharp. Loshen svara. He said very sharp svaras. Taisus brings another girsa that it's not Rabbi Yehuda Sabar, but it's Rabbi Yehuda Hasvach, which means that he made hats. That was his business. He would make hats. Okay. Third pshat Taisus just brings from a pasuk that there's a city that had this name Svacha. So he was called Rabbi Yehuda Safach because of the city that he came from. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda Sabar said, Lo nechleku beishamai ubeishilul al mechitzas hamagias letikra. They do not argue in a case where the partitions reaches to the ceiling. That you need a separate Erev for every group. Al meh nechleku. What are they arguing about? Al mechitzas she'ein magias letikra. Only if it doesn't reach to the ceiling. Shebishamai yoimrim erev l'chol chabura v'chabura. You still need a separate Erev for every group. Beis Hillel yoimrim erev echad l'kulan. Beis Hillel still say, in this case, and not still say because it doesn't reach to the ceiling, so therefore one Erev is good for all of them. Very clear brayso. So the Gemara says, goes through the different opinions we had before. Laman damar b'mechitzas hamagias letikra machlokes. The one that says that they're arguing in a case when it reaches to the ceiling, the partition, to yufta. So this brayso clearly refutes that opinion. Right over here it says that then they don't argue. The opinion that said that the argument is when the mechitzas do not reach to the ceiling, sayata. This brayso is a clear ayat to that opinion. The opinion that we said before, that Rav Nachman said, that they're only arguing in a case of a mesipis, but as long as it's higher than 10 tfachim, they don't argue to yufta. It's also a to yufta, because over here it says, as long as it doesn't reach to the ceiling. The fact that it's higher than 10 tfachim is not enough to say that they don't argue. If it doesn't reach to the ceiling, they still argue. So it's also to yufta. Ella, the question will be, lahach lishne, the Amar of Nachman, af b'mesipis machlokes, that the argument is in both cases. They're arguing sai in a case where it's above 10 tfachim, and they're also arguing in a case of mesipis, leime to have it to yufta. What it says over here, that they argue in a case where it does not reach to the ceiling, is it going to be a tiyufta on that opinion? So over here it's not so clear, because they said af b'mesipis pligi, so machlokes. So maybe this brayso is only saying one case. Rav Nachman is adding that they're also arguing b'mesipis. So is this brayso going to be a tiyufta on that opinion? So the Gemara says no. Amalach Rav Nachman can say to you, pligi b'mechitze. They argue in a case of a mechitze that's above 10 tfachim, it doesn't reach the ceiling, but v'hu adin b'mesipis. They also argue in a case where you have a very shvache mechitze, a very low mechitze, even below 10 tfachim. V'hai the kamifligi b'mechitze. This, that the brayso says that they argue about a mechitze. Why does the brayso say mechitze? Does the Mishnah say the lashon mechitze? No, the Mishnah doesn't. The brayso. Why does the brayso say the lashon mechitze if they also argue about a mesipis? To let you know the heter of Beis Hillel, that even in a case where you have a mechitza that could be much higher than 10 tfachim, but since it doesn't reach all the way to the ceiling, that's enough to say that they're considered to be like one group. But really they're arguing in both cases, like Rav Nachman said. Frek the Gemara, why not the other way around? Why shouldn't they argue in a case of a mesipis? Dafke, why doesn't the brayso say that they argue in a case of such a low mechitza, and to tell you to let you know how machmer beishamai is, that even in such a case they're considered to be separate. And for the Gemara, no, koyach te'era adif. If you have an option, if they're arguing in two cases, you have an option to point out how powerful the heter is, or how powerful the chumra is. The koyach of heter is stronger, and therefore that's what we point out. Okay, just to point out an interesting thing that the Mefarshim say over here, the Gemara brings this brayso in the name of Rabbi Yehuda HaSabar to shlog up what it said before. Now, before we had first Rav Nachman, but then afterwards we had Pligi bar Rab Chiya Rab Shimon beRebbi. Rab Shimon beRebbi was a Tana. So the Mefarshim point out it's an unusual thing that the Gemara shlogs up what it said in the name of one Tana because of a brayso that it finds from another Tana. It's not a tiyufta b'chlal. This Tana held like this, and this Tana held like this. Mainly the fact that we shlog up Rav Nachman, he was an Amayra. But Rab Shimon, how are we slugging up his opinion from Rabbi Yehuda? So the Gemara, so some of Farshim say it must be that this Rabbi Yehuda Sabar, he's not the regular Rabbi Yehuda that's usually quoted in Shas. Usually you have machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon. This Rabbi Yehuda Sabar was from a very early generation of Tanoim, and you see over here in the Gemara that you can slug up something that Tanoim said in the later times, later generation of Tanoim, from something that a Tana said from a much earlier generation. Interesting thing. Okay, let's go right in the Gemara. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Halachik Rabbi Yehuda Sabar. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda Sabar. That the machlokes is in a case where you have partitions that are very high, but they don't reach to the ceiling. That's where they're. If it reaches to the ceiling, they don't argue. If it doesn't reach to the ceiling, that's when there was the argument of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Masnisan Nami Deika, I'll prove this to you from the Mishnah as well. Diktani, what does it say in the Mishnah? Umaydim bizman shemikzasan shruyim b'chadorim u'ba'aliyos shetzrichen erev l'chol chabura v'chabura. If you have a house and different people are living in different rooms or on a second floor, so then everybody agrees that you have to have a separate erev for each one of them. My chadarim or my aliyas. What does it mean that they're living in separate rooms or in a separate floor? Ilay chadarim mamish aliyas mamish. Does it literally mean that they're a totally separate room with a separate entrance, separate floor, separate entrance? Pshita. Obviously, they have to have a separate eruv. Just because it's in one big building, what does it matter? It's pashit. Elalav. So the chiddush of the Mishnah is ke'en chadarim or ke'en aliyas. When the separation between one and another is similar to a mamish, like a separate room or like a separate floor. What does that mean? Umay niu mechitzas hamegiyas latikra. When you have a partition that reaches all the way to the ceiling, so that's enough of a partition similar to a separate room and similar to a separate floor. Shma mina. So I see from here that the argument between Hillel and Beishamai is only when it's not a full partition. Tane, we learned in a braise. So now the Gemara is going to bring a braise here that's going to actually bring a totally different pshat in the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Till here, the Gemara was learning the pshat and the machlokes of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai kepshuta. You have people that are living in one big room and there's a partition between them. So are they considered to be like one group, or are they considered to be each one separate? And as I mentioned before, the nafkamina is legabi two things. Number one, the nafkamina is amongst them themselves. Are they allowed to carry from one to another without making a native chatzeris between one and another? And also to carry into the chatzer. If there are other people of the chatzer and they want to make an native chatzeris with them, do they have to be mishtatev with each one of them separately or not? Now the Gemara is going to explain, no, that's not the pshat. Everybody agrees legabe between themselves. If they want to be able to carry from one to another, it's for sure considered to be one big room and they can carry from one to another without a native chatzeris. Even Beis Shammai agrees to that. The machlokes over here between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is only going to be beneged to them being mishtatif with everybody else. Do they each individually have to be mishtatif, or is it enough if one gives the food for all of them? And in that itself, there's going to be two shittas about this. But that's the basic point the Gemara is going to say here now. Tanen, Abraisa we learned. When was it said that each one of them separately, if they want to make an eid of chatzeris with other people in the chatzah, that they each individually have to be mishtatif, if they're making an eid of chatzeris with the rest of the people of the chatzah, and where's the food being placed? Not in their traklin. The food is being placed in someone else's house, somewhere else. So then each one of them individually has to give his food for the eid of chatzeris. Aval im haya Eiruvin ba etzlan. If the food of the eid of chatzeris is coming to them, they're making an eid of chatzeris with the other people of the chatzah, but where's the food being placed? In their traklin. Then everyone would agree that it's one eruv for all of them. You put the food in their house. They don't all separately have to be mishtatif. Just one of them adds the food that's being placed in their house. It's good. So as I mentioned, the Braisa doesn't spell it out, but Rashi explains this, that needless to say that what this Braisa is being mechadish, that if they want to be able to carry from one section to another section amongst themselves, for sure they don't need an eruv. The basis of this whole point of here is that between themselves they're considered to be like one group. The point of here is if they want to be mishtatif with other people, so over here is where the machlokes is. And when's the machlokes? The machlokes is only if they want to take their eruv somewhere else. Beis Shammai is being machmer. Beis Shammai says, although legabi themselves they're considered to be one group. Number one. Number two, although we say if you're going to bring the food to them, they're considered to be one group. But if you're putting the eid of chatzeris somewhere else, they all have to be mishtatif separately. When you take the food out and you're putting it somewhere else, over here I say each one of them is separating and going out separately of their room, so then I say that you have to put for each one of them food separately. But if you're putting the food by them, so then they're considered to be all sharing the same space in one group together.
This is even mechitzas hamegiyas l'tikra?
No.
No, nothing.
No. L'chayra, the gabi that, it's not changing. The case of the Mishnah is mechitzas she'ei magiyas l'tikra, at least according to the conclusion of Rabbi Yehuda Saber. Yeah, that's the.
If it's mechitzas hamegiyas l'tikra, then that's every house. That's the type of how is that different than a regular house?
Because it's only yiriyos, it's only material, it's not proper walls. That's the taisis that I mentioned before, right? Yeah, so that's the pshat of this brayso now. So now the Gemara says, Kaman Ozla Ha the Tanya. So based on this pshat in our Mishnah here, so according to who is going to go this that we learned in another brayso, Ha the Tanya, Chamisha Shegovu es Eiruvin. You have 5 people that are living together in one chutzner, and Shegovu es Eiruvin, they all made an Erev Chatzeris together. Keshemelichin es Eiruvin l'makim acher. If they are going to now bring their Erev somewhere else, they're going to want to be mishtatif with another chutzner. They're putting their Erev somewhere else. Erev echad l'kulan. They can all, one person makes the Erev for all of them. They don't all individually have to be mishtatif in an Erev Chatzeris. According to who does this go? Ki Beis Hillel. This only goes according to Beis Hillel. Why only according to Beis Hillel? Beis Shammai holds, even when you have people that are all sharing together, like in the case of here of the Traklan, and they're all considered to be like one. Or in a case where people made an Erev Chatzeris together. But if they're now going to go and make an Erev Chatzeris somewhere else, they're putting food somewhere else, now each one of them individually has to go put in food somewhere else. If you're putting food by them, then the fact that they're shared together, you don't need to have separate food for each one of them. But if they're putting food out somewhere else, you do have to have for each one separately. So this brayso that says that you don't need, that it's one Erev for all of them, this goes according to Beis Hillel. Now the Gemara brings another opinion, that Beis Shammai was actually more machmer. There's another opinion that says, Bamed varam amurim kishahaya erev ba etzlan. When is the machlekes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? If the erev, these people that are living all together, and the erev is being placed amongst them, they want to make an erev with the other people of the chutzner, and the erev is being placed amongst them. There's a machlekes here whether each one of them has to be mishtatev separately. Avlam hay melichin es Eiruvin l'makim acher. If these people that are sharing this traklan together, or people that made an Erev Chatzeris together, and they want to now go and make a shituf with other people somewhere else, and they're putting the food somewhere else, everybody would agree that each group individually has to be mishtatif with food that's being placed somewhere else. So Adarab, according to this Iked Amri, it's much more chumrah. So now the Gemara brings back the same brayso that we brought before. Kaman Azla Ha the Tanya Chamisha Shegovu es Eiruvin. 5 people that made an Erev Chatzeris together. Keshemelichin es Eiruvin l'makim acher. If they now want to make an Erev Chatzeris with another Chatzer, and they want to put food somewhere else, so the brayso says Erev echad l'kulan. It's enough that one person puts food there for everybody. Kaman, according to who is this? The loik echad. According to this Iked Amri, this brayso is not going to fit with any opinion. According to the second Iked Amri, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that if you put the food somewhere else, everybody has to be mishtatev with that. So obviously, the second Iked Amri, we don't paskin like the second Iked Amri, we paskin like the first Iked Amri. Okay. Zok to Mishnah. We start over here also similar. This is all a similar subject when you get to people that are living together. How do you define when you have to make a separate eruv? So it brings another kind of scenario now. You have brothers that are eating by their father's table. But they do have their own houses where they sleep in. Because they sleep in their own house, they have to all have a separate eruv for themselves. So as the Gemara is going to explain, they don't mamish eat by their father's house. We'll see in the Gemara. They get something from their father, but they don't mamish eat from. If they would all mamish literally be living and eating all the meals by their father, the fact that he sleeps separately wouldn't necessarily change anything. Okay, we'll see in the Gemara. Now the Mishnah says, so therefore, if one of them did not make an Erev Chatzeris, he's going to have to be mevatlas reshus to everybody, because he sleeps in a separate place, so he has to make an Erev Chatzeris separately. But not the Mishnah says, Masai, when do these brothers that sleep in their own house have to make a separate Eirov? That's only if the Eirov that is being made with the other people of the Chatzar is being put somewhere else, not in their father's house. Aval im hoya Eirov ba etzlan, if the Eirov is being placed by them in their father's house, Oy, she'eni ma'an diyurin b'chatzar. How about a case where there's nobody else living there? It's just a chatzar with the father that has a house, and then these brothers that have houses. There's nobody else. They don't have to make an erev chatzeris with anyone else. Then einan tzrichen la'arev. Then they don't have to have an additional erev. The fact that their father is the only one that it's them and their father, and the fact that they share food with their father is good enough. So the basic point of what the Mishnah is saying is, If they're making an Erev Chatzeris with other people of the Chatzer, and they're putting the food of the Erev Chatzeris somewhere else, so then the fact that they get some food from the father's house is not significant enough that they shouldn't have to individually be mishtatev with this Erev Chatzeris. But if the Erev Chatzeris is actually being placed there in that house, in their father's house, where they get their food from, so the fact that they get their food from there is going to be a good enough that because the Erev is being placed there, they can rely on that they get their food from there also, and therefore they don't have to make their separate Erev. Or if there's nobody else exactly that's living there besides them and their father.
So why is that now that someone else is living there now makes them a different, separate now? And if there's someone living there?
If there's someone else living there, then you have to make a proper Erev Chatzeris. You have to go and put food somewhere. You have to make if you have to make a proper Erev Chatzeris, so other people living there that have no shaykhs to their father. No shaykhs. So it's two totally separate individuals. You have to make a proper Erev. So they have to be mishtatev with that Erev as well.
Each one separately.
Right. But if there's no one else living there, it's just them and their father, they have a shaykhs to their father. They take food from their father. And a chanami, they don't mamish live by their father, but they have a shaykhs to their father, so if it's only them and their father, they can rely on that, on the Erev that is being placed, or the food that's there in their father's house. But the Gemara now starts off with one simple point. The Shmami, no, what do we see from this Mishnah? Mokim lina gairim. The place where you sleep is what's guiding to define if you have a separate quarters that you're living, that you have to make a separate Erev Chatzeris. You have over here, if you learn the simple pshat of the Mishnah, they're eating together with their father, they're sleeping separately, and what do we say? Because they sleep in a different house, therefore they have to make a separate Erev Chatzeris. What's the problem with this? So as Rashi says, we'll see soon in the Gemara here, there's a machlekes about this. Rav and Shmuel. Rav says, no, you don't go after Mokum Lina. You go after the place where a person eats, but over here, you see in the Mishnah, you go after the place where a person sleeps. When it says in our Mishnah that they eat in their father's house, it doesn't mean literally that they mamish eat in their father's house. They're only mekabel pras from their father's house. What does mekabel pras from their father's house mean? Rashi's pshat is, Rashi, the last Rashi in the Amud, Hitzah mi beis aviyim. They get expenses. Their father gives them money to be able to buy food, but not that they're actually eating b'chlal from their father's house. Other Rishonim say mekabli pras means they get portions of food. They don't eat it necessarily in their father's house. They get portions of food, takeout, and they take it home to their house to eat by them. That's the Taicham. So there's the different pshatim over here, what exactly mekabli pras means. Okay, let's see a little bit weiter the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan, Misha Yeshloi, Beis Shar, Achsadre, Mirpeses, B'chatza Chaveira. If you are living by your friend, but you don't have a proper house, B'chlal, there's a Beis Shar there. Beis Shar is like a hallway in front of the house where you usually have a guard that sits there, and you have that Beis Shar. Or Nachsadre. Nachsadre is a place that has an open, it could have 3 walls, but has an open wall. Mirpeses, a porch. In the chutzah of your friend, if you have that in your friend's chutzah, you don't asr him. It's not b'chlal a place that you can live there. It's an open area, or it's not a place made for living b'chlal. Beis hateven. However, if you have a beis hateven, beis habakar, beis ha'etzim, it's a place that you can store things, even though it's not, you don't live there, but you can store things there. Or beis ha'eitzris, storage. Hareza oiser alav. Then you do asr on the other person in the chutzah, even if you're not living there. That's the Tanakama's opinion. We don't pass in this way. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says, Eina oise ela makom dire bilvad. You don't aser if you're living together with someone else in a chutzah, only if it's a place that you actually could live there. Not stam a place that you can put your things there because you have a oitzer there, but you're not there. Rabbi Yehuda, now Rabbi Yehuda said, as a raya to his opinion, Maise ben Nafche, Ben Nafche owned different courtyards in different places. He had 5 chatzeres, Be'usha, the city Usha. And the story came in front of Chachamim. The question now is, he owns properties in different places. So where does he ask it on the other people? V'amru, and the Chachamim said, Eina oise ela beis dira bilvad. He's only oise where he has a beis dira. So the Gemara immediately clarifies this. Beis dira sal kedaitach. Does beis dira mean wherever he owns a property that's a beis dira, he'll ask it? In other words, the Gemara understands beis dira means if it's fit for living there, even if he does not live there. That goes against what Rabbi Yehuda himself just said. Rabbi Yehuda says it's only a place where you're actually living there. Ele'eme makim dira. You have to change that. No, he only asks in that chutzner where he actually lives, not in the chutzner because he owns a property there, but he doesn't live there. Okay, so that's how we passing, like Rabbi Yehuda. So let's just finish now with here comes the machlekes of Rav and Shmuel. So my makim dire. Where? How do we define where's the place that I live? So Rav Amar makim pita. Rav says the place where a person eats. Or Shmuel Amar makim lina. And Shmuel says that the place where a person sleeps. So we obviously paskin like Rav. We paskin like Rav that by Erev Chatzeres we go according to the place where a person eats, not where a person sleeps.
By Truman, we established a place where you put your pass over there.
Right. Right. Not where the person sleeps. Right. That what? That over there it's been tzad shalom bias, so that's why it has to be dafka in the place where you eat.